From airport security to presidential protection details, from hostage rescue teams to the hands of the world's most elite special forces operators, for over 6 decades, one submachine gun has refused to be replaced, refused to be outdone, and refused to die. The weapon that defined modern counterterrorism, the gun that turned a generation of gamers into armchair operators, and the firearm that made the world watch in astonishment on a May evening in London. Today, the full story of the most legendary submachine gun ever manufactured, the Heckler Koch MP5. To understand why the MP5 matters so much, you've got to understand just how terrible everything that came before it actually was. By the late 1950s and early 1960s, submachine guns had hit an all-time low in terms of quality. The grease gun, the American M3, cost roughly $15 to produce. The British Sterling was essentially a glorified pipe with a magazine poking out the side. The famous Thompson, once the pinnacle of SMG engineering, was practically collecting its pension by this point. These weren't precision instruments, they were tools. Disposable, rough, barely finished tools. Wartime production had done this. When the Second World War kicked off, every nation needed submachine guns by the millions, and they needed them yesterday. Quality went straight out the window. Backstreet fabrication shops that had spent the previous decade making bicycle frames and engine components were suddenly stamping out firearms by the tens of thousands. Wide tolerances, rough welds, parts that wobbled against each other. Bad ergonomics, ugly finishing, and accuracy that could be described generously as optimistic. The philosophy was simple: produce as many as possible, with as little material as possible, as cheaply as possible. The Cold War didn't fix any of this. Some nations shuffled around their rubbish. Britain swapped the truly awful Sten for the marginally less awful Sterling, which is a bit like trading a broken brolly for a slightly less broken one. Others just kept using what they had from the war, because why invest in something new when the old stuff still technically fired? The Soviet Union took the sensible route and abandoned SMGs entirely in favor of assault rifles, which, fair enough, but that left most Western militaries clutching these crude, outdated weapons and pretending everything was fine. And the fundamental mechanical problem with all of them? Open bolt operation. Every single one of those classic Cold War SMGs fired from an open bolt. What that means in practice is that when you pull the trigger, a massive heavy bolt slams forward, grabs a round from the magazine, loads it and discharges it, all in one single violent lurch. All of that reciprocating mass is throwing itself around inside the gun at the exact moment you're trying to keep the sights on target. The result is predictably horrible. Single shots went wherever they felt like going. Full auto turned the muzzle into something resembling a garden sprinkler, spraying rounds in a rough cone and hoping something connected. Accurate, controlled fire was essentially a fantasy. There was another problem nobody really talked about openly. These SMGs shared absolutely nothing in common with the service rifles soldiers were actually trained on. A British squaddie would spend months learning the L1A1 SLR, every control position drilled into muscle memory, and then get handed a Sterling that worked completely differently. Different safety position, different charging handle, different magazine release, different everything. It was like spending a year learning to ride a horse and then being handed a unicycle and told to get on with it. Under stress, in the dark, taking fire, muscle memory is everything, and these weapons destroyed it. What the world genuinely needed was a submachine gun built to a different standard entirely. Accurate, reliable, properly engineered, and ideally one that shared enough controls with existing service rifles that soldiers didn't have to unlearn everything they knew. Enter a company from Oberndorf am Neckar in West Germany that had already done something remarkable with the G3 battle rifle: Heckler Koch. The G3 used a delayed roller blowback system, an operating mechanism that had roots in wartime German engineering, specifically borrowed from concepts developed around the MG42. It was accurate, robust, and exceptionally well made. And somebody at HK quite brilliantly asked a simple question: what if we scaled that down for a pistol cartridge? Development on what would become the MP5 started in 1964. The engineers at H&K weren't designing a single weapon, they were designing a family. Same operating system, same manual of arms, different calibers, 7.62mm NATO for the full battle rifle, 5.56mm for an assault rifle variant, and 9mm parabellum for the submachine gun. The SMG version was designated the HK MP5 internally. And by 1966, West Germany's federal law enforcement and elite special operations units had already adopted it, first as the MP64, then rapidly redesignated under the naming convention that became one of the most recognizable model numbers in firearms history. The MP5, just like that. So what actually made it special? Right, here's where it gets genuinely exciting. The MP5 fires from a closed bolt, not open. Closed. Before you pull the trigger, the round is already chambered, the bolt is already locked, and there's no heavy mass slamming forward when you fire. The recoil impulse is dramatically smoother, the muzzle barely moves, and the sights stay on target in a way that previous submachine guns simply could not manage. Troops who trained on it for the first time described the experience as almost unfair. Point it, squeeze, and rounds go where you pointed. No drama, no fighting the gun, no chasing the muzzle back onto target. The accuracy figures were honestly absurd for the category. At 25 meters, it could consistently put rounds into a group the size of a fist. At 100 meters, it was outperforming most service pistols at half that distance. Special forces operators were making shots with it that would have been considered difficult with a proper rifle. And the reliability. H&K documented the MP5 running over 30,000 rounds without a stoppage under test conditions. There were guns in service with documented round counts exceeding 500,000 through the original barrel. Mud, sand, salt water, extreme cold, desert heat, it didn't matter, the thing just ran. The thing. But here's something that genuinely doesn't get enough attention. The controls. The MP5's charging handle sits right up at the front of the receiver, pulled back exactly the same way as the G3. The fire selector is in the same position as the G3, right under the thumb, and it's ambidextrous. The paddle magazine release works the same way. The disassembly procedure mirrors the G3 almost exactly. Hand an operator who's trained on the G3 and MP5, and they're running it competently within minutes, not days. The muscle memory transfers directly. For everyone else, the overall layout is familiar enough that adaptation is fast. Fed by 15 or 30 round magazines, 800 rounds per minute cyclic rate, and that legendary smooth, flat shooting character. The MP5 didn't just improve on other submachine guns, it embarrassed them. Then came the moment that put the MP5 on every television screen in the world. The 30th of April, 1980. 6 armed militants from the Democratic Revolutionary Front for the Liberation of Arabistan stormed the Iranian Embassy in Prince's Gate, London, taking 26 hostages. For 6 days, Metropolitan Police negotiators worked to resolve the situation without bloodshed. It almost worked. Then, on the 5th of May, the militants shot hostage Abbas Lavasani and pushed his body out the front door. The decision was made at the highest level. Margaret Thatcher handed operational authority to the armed forces. The SAS were moving in. Operation Nimrod began at 7:23 in the evening. 30 operators from B Squadron dressed entirely in black, gas masks on, abseil ropes attached to the roof, and MP5s in hand. Some came down the outside of the building on ropes, others punched through windows using frame charges. Stun grenades went off throughout the building simultaneously, disorienting everyone inside. The operators moved through the rooms with a speed and precision that looked almost choreographed. 17 minutes. That's how long it took. 5 militants killed, 1 captured, and 19 hostages brought out alive. And the entire thing played out live on British television. The world had never seen anything like it. Millions of people watched black-clad operators swing through windows and clear rooms with absolute clinical efficiency. And in every single one of their hands, the MP5. The SAS became legends that evening, and the MP5 became the weapon that every counter-terrorism unit on the planet immediately wanted. The image of that operator in a gas mask and assault suit, MP5 raised, became the defining photograph of modern special forces. Every government with a counter-terrorism budget started making phone calls to Oberndorf. The MP5 wasn't just a good submachine gun anymore. It was the Mercedes of submachine guns. And everyone knew it. Hollywood noticed. Of course Hollywood noticed. In 1988, Die Hard arrived in cinemas and became an instant classic. Bruce Willis as John McClane, barefoot New York cop against a building full of very well-armed criminals led by the brilliantly menacing Hans Gruber. Gruber's men carried MP5s throughout the film, technically HK MP5 semi-auto carbines modified for the production, but visually identical, and that's all that mattered. The association was immediate and permanent. See an MP5 on screen and you understand instantly that the person holding it is dangerous, professional, and not to be negotiated with. Die Hard embedded that into the cultural consciousness of an entire generation. H&K, to their credit, or perhaps mild embarrassment depending on how you look at it, tried to replace the MP5 with something newer. By the late 1990s, the argument was that the gun was expensive to manufacture, required highly skilled machinists, and was built from steel in a world that had fallen completely in love with polymer. In 1999, they introduced the UMP, the Universal Machine Pistol. Polymer frame, modular caliber conversions available in 9mm, .40 Smith & Wesson and .45 ACP, lighter at 2.3 kilograms unloaded versus the MP5's 2.5, cheaper to produce, simpler to maintain. On paper, a perfectly sensible upgrade. The problem was the operating system. The UMP used simple blowback rather than delayed roller blowback. Cheaper and simpler to manufacture? Absolutely. But without the roller delay slowing down that bolt, the felt recoil went up noticeably, and the muzzle started doing things that MP5 operators found deeply unpleasant. The MP5 is like shooting something that doesn't particularly want to recoil. The UMP, especially on full auto, is considerably more insistent about reminding you that it's firing. Every unit that evaluated both came back with essentially the same report. The UMP is fine, the MP5 is better. The UMP found some buyers, the US Border Patrol adopted it, some tactical assault units selected the .45 ACP variant, but it never came close to replacing the gun it was designed to supersede. H&K ended up making both, which probably wasn't the plan. The variants are where the MP5 story gets genuinely fascinating, because H&K didn't stop at one configuration. The adaptability of the roller-delayed platform turned out to be extraordinary. The MP5 SD is the suppressed variant, and it does something that most suppressed firearms don't. Rather than requiring the shooter to switch to subsonic ammunition to avoid the supersonic crack, the SD's barrel is ported inside the suppressor housing, bleeding off gas as the round travels down the barrel and slowing it to subsonic velocities automatically. Standard supersonic 9mm in, whisper, quiet out. Quiet, accurate, and deeply unsettling for anyone on the receiving end. Then there's the MP5K Kurz, meaning short in German, and short is underselling it. The MP5K measures just 32.5 centimeters with the stock folded, with an 11.5 centimeter barrel, and was small enough to fit inside a specially designed briefcase with a trigger mechanism built into the handle. Covert operations, close protection, vehicle use. The K variant took an already compact weapon and made it practically concealable. The MP5N was developed specifically for the United States Navy SEALs, featuring a Navy trigger group with fully ambidextrous controls, a threaded and ported barrel for suppressor attachment, and stainless steel internals to handle the corrosive marine environment. The SEALs used it extensively for years. The MP5/10 and MP5/40, chambered in 10mm auto and .40 Smith & Wesson respectively, came later for users who wanted more stopping power from the same platform. By the 1990s, though, a serious challenge to the 9mm pistol caliber concept was emerging from within NATO itself. Rear echelon personnel, tankers, engineers, signals operators, logistics troops, needed something more capable than a pistol, but less bulky than a full rifle. The FNP-90 arrived in 1990, firing the purpose-designed 5.7 by 28mm cartridge, armor-piercing capable, with a 50-round top-mounted magazine and a silhouette that looked like something from a science fiction film. Then, in 2001, H&K responded with the MP7, chambered in 4.6 by 30mm, also armor-piercing capable, and compact enough to be carried like a large pistol. Both weapons underwent rigorous NATO evaluation. In most trials, the 5.7 by 28 demonstrated superior results compared to the 4.6 by 30. Germany vetoed the P90's adoption on political grounds. Neither cartridge became a NATO standard, and both weapons carved out niche roles without displacing the MP5 in the roles it already owned. The more significant threat came from a different direction entirely. After the 1997 North Hollywood shootout demonstrated in front of news cameras that 9mm wasn't going to stop a determined attacker in body armor, and after operations in Afghanistan and Iraq proved that even close-quarters units sometimes needed to engage at distances and against protection levels that 9mm couldn't handle, American SWAT teams and military units started making a switch. The M4 carbine in 5.56mm could do everything the MP5 did, plus defeat soft body armor, engage accurately out to 300 meters, and share ammunition with every other soldier in the unit. The FBI's hostage rescue team swapped their MP5/10s for Colt M4 carbines. Dozens of American SWAT teams followed. On pure capability metrics, the argument made sense. But 5.56mm creates its own problems in the environments where the MP5 was built to operate. Dense urban spaces, aircraft, crowded buildings, hostage scenarios, anywhere that over-penetration through walls and barriers could kill innocents rather than threats. A 5.56mm round carries lethal energy through multiple interior walls. Modern frangible ammunition helps, but the risk doesn't disappear entirely. In those specific situations where surgical precision and minimal collateral risk are the absolute priority, 9mm comparative limitation becomes an advantage. The MP5 still holds a role that nothing else fills quite as well. And there's a genuinely interesting development on the horizon for it. A Swedish company called CBJ Tech has developed the 6.5 by 25mm CBJ cartridge, essentially a neck-down 9mm with a tungsten penetrator that fires at 900 meters per second from a standard MP5 with nothing more than a barrel swap, generating the same recoil impulse as regular 9mm, but with penetration figures that approach rifle territory. It can reportedly defeat armored vehicle glass and light armor plate. If the cost of tungsten penetrators ever comes down to sensible production levels, you're looking at an